Is your pizza here yet?
Yes, it is.
Ah,
So
you
I'm
must
gonna
be
go
starving.
handle up on that.
Yeah, go get your pizza. What's your pizza? What did you order?
Cheese, pineapples, and banana peppers.
Pineapples,
I
Alexis.
am that person.
If I
I
would have
am that
known, I
person.
would not have been on your show if I would have known you're a pineapple pizza eater, weirdo.
I'm not sorry.
No, fair enough. I have mushrooms, so we're fair. We're even.
Welcome to another episode of 22 at the Lips. I am your host, Alexis Hardwick. If you happen to stumble along the way of your journey in life and you showed up here and slash, or if you've been following along this journey, appreciate you. This is the EMS-based podcast from EMS personnel like myself and other providers to fellow first responders and healthcare providers in general and slash, or your everyday citizen of life that's just curious about what goes on. Thank you for being here. Glad to have you. I always find a way to, whether it's by luck or chance, or I'm just right time, right moment, I find the coolest people and I get them on the podcast because I don't know, they just join, bless them. And our guest today was definitely one of those experiences. Because Master Your Medic sponsors the podcast. Thank you guys. They brought me to the EMS World Conference, which I was already so stoked about. But I got to find Mr. Dan. And if you don't know who he is, you've probably seen his work. It's like the photo art of different scenes from calls or like what first responders go through. And we're going to talk about that further. But I'm super stoked. It's an honor. I've been following Dan for quite a minute. But who better to introduce himself and what he does than the man himself? So, Dan, if you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. First, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it. It was great meeting you at EMS World in New Orleans, and that was such an amazing event, and it was great meeting you and tons of other people. But a little bit about me, I guess. I am a medically retired. That sounds weird to say now. Just recently, over the last couple months, I guess. I was full-time paramedic firefighter for 20 years. And over that time, I developed some mental stresses and was diagnosed with PTSD. And part of my recovery back in 2014, when this first started happening, was to create this artwork. And I thought it was a horrible idea at first, and it was never my intention to share it with anybody. But what I did with the help of my therapist at the time is he suggested that a way for me to process and purge the complex ideas and emotions and imagery that I was having was to create artwork from it. And what I do, the process is I think of a call that I've attended or an event or an experience that I've had where it haunts me. I describe it as an event that invades my consciousness uninvited because it just kind of pops in whenever it wants. And I think about it, and this image pops into my head. And with that image, what I do with that is I stage it with my peers, I photograph it, and then I digitally draw on top of that photograph, trying to recreate not so much what I saw, but how I feel. So the images that I create are very personal to me, and it was never initially my intention to share them with anybody. But my therapist was right. It was a way for me to process these experiences that I've had. And when I was done, I was able to purge these complex ideas and trap them into these two-dimensional images. And what I was doing was I was able to reconsolidate those memories in a different way and then recall after I create the images. I can recall that event, but not have the emotional response to it. So it was very, and it continues to be therapeutic. I still continue our work that way. So that's how it started. And then the first few that I did, I never intended on sharing with anybody because it showed paramedics. The very first one that I did was this paramedic in the back of the ambulance, and there's a ghost there, which is weird, and he's got his gloved hands on his head, which is disgusting. But it was a really great portrayal of how I felt about that specific event. So I never intended to share with anybody, expecting to be crucified really for showing emergency workers in a vulnerable state that way. And I decided eventually to share it just because it looked, it's kind of cartoony, kind of cool looking picture. And when I did, that's when I realized that other people, my peers, would look at that image and attach their own experiences to it. And I didn't think that was going to happen. And because of that, the artwork that I create is, I guess, is fairly well known within our community. And I think it helps. Well, I've been told that other people are able to get the same benefit from it that I do. So that encourages me to continue to do that. And now I'm really lucky where I get to travel the world and exhibit my artwork. And I do a presentation on post-traumatic growth where I share my own experiences and about recovery and post-traumatic growth. And yeah, I'm very, very lucky. And then I get invited to talk on podcasts like yours and meet really cool people. So yeah, it's great.
I want to give a shout out to one, you go into therapy for your PTSD and your mental health struggles, because that is, I feel like in a way, the movement to acknowledge that we have these mental health struggles in this job, it's getting better. But at the same time, it's still either that stigma of, oh, well, I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm not emotionally connected or anything like that. Then it's also in a very nice way. You have your older generations of EMS personnel and fire and police and stuff like that, these first responders who have been here since pterodactyls responded to
Yeah.
calls.
You can call us dinosaurs. That's okay. I'm one of those people. You can call us dinosaurs, and we actually take that as a compliment. So it's okay. No
Back
problem.
when mask pants were a thing, but that's besides the point.
Oh yeah, mass pants. Yeah.
But again, it's not all of them, but like they just have this idea that like if you need help, you're a snowflake and you're not made for this field, which is not the case. And then it's also like for me, it's a pride thing because I guess I fall under the stigma of both of those of like, I don't want to say I need help because I should be able to handle this job. So the fact that you went to therapy speaks a lot and super commend you for it. But also just the unique way of you starting your journey and like creating this process for, processing these calls and getting through them and the long-term effects of them is creating something for yourself, having that outlet, and then further like developing it and stuff like that. And I think that's super cool. I super commend it. Because it's easy to fall into that trap of like you have the call, you push it down, and then in a very vulnerable state of existence right now, they come back with a vengeance at either a super random time or with a call that's associated with that memory and that event. So yeah, finding that way to get through that and find that outlet and process it in that way. I've never heard of it like, doing the art and stuff like, but I think it's super cool. Different techniques speak to different people's. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know you have a specific work that when I saw it, it did something for me. It's the one where it's the female first responder. She's like sitting on the step up of the back of the ambulance, and like she's got her head in her hands, and it looks like there's like all those ghosts around her, and it's kind of just like that very. You can see it, like you can feel it from looking at it, just like that overwhelming, just that burden, and the same thing, like the things that like you can't just shake off. You can't just wash your hands after the call and like you're good to go. Like it's
That's a good point when you say wash your hands. I don't know if you noticed on that one, but she has one glove on one hand, and there's blood on that glove. I think there might be blood on her hand without the glove, which was very meaningful. That was very purposeful when I created that artwork. Meaning that it was like we have blood on our hands. So the idea of that one, and I usually don't like telling people what my motivation is in creating them because I don't want people to feel that what their interpretation of the artwork isn't valid then. And that's not the case your interpretation of that art piece is just as valid as my motivation in creating it, even if it's not the same. But the reason I created that one was paramedics aren't perfect. I was a pretty good paramedic, but I'm not a perfect paramedic. And I make mistakes. And I think paramedics, we are our worst critics that way. We always go back and, is there anything I could have done differently? We go back. I'm like, okay, did I do the right drug choices? Was the right dose correct? Did I use the flow rate for the fluids? Was that enough? And, did I do the proper airway techniques? So we're always going back and we're asking ourselves if, the reason the outcome was negative was because we did something wrong. So I really struggled with that a lot. And that's why I created that artwork where that paramedic has blood on their hands, or that was her interpretation. That's my interpretation of, this patient died because I did something wrong. And now I feel like I have blood on my hands because of that. So they're sitting in the back of the ambulance. All those ghosts of the people were looking at them, surrounding her. And they're portrayed in all these different ways of dying. And I struggled with that for a long time. And then I made the realization of, my patient's not going to die necessarily because I put, an 20 gauge instead of an 18 gauge when I'm trying to do fluid resuscitation. They probably died because they were hit by that car, or, shot 7 times, or they were 90 years old and their heart finally stopped. But I'd always think, well, maybe if I would have done something differently, they would have lived, and blame whatever I didn't do or could have done differently on that outcome. When the reality is they probably would have died no matter what happened. Right. So that's a struggle that I had. And I think many paramedics have, which is why I created that art piece. So I hope that doesn't ruin your interpretation of it or what it means to you. But that is a very popular one. And it was very, very cathartic for me in creating it.
By no means is it ruined at all. And actually added a lot to it because I don't think I even noticed that part. But also something that you said that I want to kind of highlight is the idea that you didn't want to like publish and show people your work because of the idea of making first responders vulnerable, but at the same time, it humanizes not only your works, but also it's that connection between the viewer and what you create. But also, I mean, anybody and everybody can stumble upon it and kind of, because you hear the bystander and citizens of the community you work in, they'll say something like, "Oh, I bet you've seen a lot," or the question that I feel like
The question,
what's
yeah.
the worst thing you've ever seen? Like my paycheck, my guy, like don't ask any questions.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know, that's a great answer.
The condition of our bags in the truck after the rotating shift. That's the worst thing. But anyways, not calling anybody out, but so kind of just like highlighting that, like, even though we do get to do, cool things, we get to have a vast amount of knowledge and training and all of the things that, like, we get to go to random people's houses we've never met, know them in a very deep and intimate level of like their birthday and social security. Like we have a lot of power under our tool belt, whatever. But as much as all this stuff's cool, it's heavy. It's realistically a heavy job. And so having these works that people can connect with and have that feeling of like, man, like I ran a call like that, or I've been standing in the back of the ambulance with one hand up on the side door and like just head down, like not knowing what to do next. And those moments where it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. Because also with the idea of paramedics put so much weight on their shoulders is you go through this training, you learn all the things, you know what to do when, but even though you know when to give the right amount of epi in a code, or that amio is indicated for this heart rhythm, and all of the things, it's still, like you said, it doesn't change the patient's outcome because of events and issues that were present before we even got the call about it. So, and then everyone when you get your paramedic badge, it may have happened while you were doing your clinicals, but probably not. Um, you end up having that one call where either the patient looks you dead in the eyes and says, "Don't let me die," or you do everything you absolutely can to every extent. You have the diesel bolus of transport. Even if you have your bilateral 16s, you have your fluid resusc, you have your BV, like no matter what you have, it still isn't going to fix the patient because of things that are out of your capability. Even if you had I've had the patient, you have a 3-minute drive to the ER and the surgical team is already there and like they open the patient bedside, all that stuff. It's not going to change anything because of things that are out of our control, but it is so heavily weighed upon us mentally and even after our training and education that like you're the middleman between this patient making it or not. And so like it's that mindset is instilled in us to understand the responsibility that we have because these are people's lives in our hands. But at the same time, we can't help everything. Like
Hmm.
sometimes people do it to themselves.
Yeah. But sometimes we can help. And that's why the job is so rewarding, right? So
Absolutely.
that's why, the stuff that paramedics do, yeah, we often do make that difference. We do make that difference of saving people. And when the times, but also people are supposed to die, and sometimes it's just their time. And we're even in that case, we're lucky. I always consider it kind of like an honor to be there at that moment for them. Of course, still doing my protocols to try to, alter that outcome, but often we do alter that outcome. And that's why it's so amazing to be a paramedic. And that's why we have those opportunities to make those, God, the biggest of significances for people in altering the outcome of their lives. And that is massively rewarding, right? Which is really incredible, which is why anyone that asks me that they say they want to become a paramedic, I'm like, do it. Do it. Because if you want to, for me, I wanted to live life. I wanted to live a big, full life on the edge. I'm like, well, what job can I have to do that? At the time, I was working as a dive master in the Cayman Islands, and like, yeah, I become a paramedic, and it did not disappoint. It did not disappoint. Like I have an art piece called The Circus, where this paramedic is outside this tent, this big circus tent. On the top, it says Circus EMS, and he's about to go in. Right, he's going to go in there we work 24-hour shifts. He's going to go in there. And I felt this way even after 20 years. Go in there, don't know what's going to happen. Some of the stuff I'll recognize, some of the stuff I won't, but I just don't know. And then I get to play in the circus for 24 hours and then I get to leave. But the problem is that I would often take the monkeys home with me. That's the problem. But yeah, I always promote the profession in many ways, but still be acknowledging, the potential things that can happen. And I call that being a tragic optimist, meaning that I recognize the tragedies that happen and the stuff that we see and the experiences that we have that could potentially end in us deciding to take our own lives through trauma because of the traumatic experiences we've seen. But overall, having an optimistic outlook, even in those times of suffering from, post-traumatic stress, and recognizing that there's a way out and there's recovery. And I think that's really important too. So yeah, I like that term, being a tragic optimist, versus the opposite when you say, yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, which we always do. That's a toxic positivist, right? So yeah, I'm fine, everything's great, everything's great. You shove everything underneath the rug until eventually the rug, you trip on it. You got so much stuff underneath the rug. But yeah, it's a wonderful profession.
Worst case, you always get that meme that you pick up off the floor for a lift assist or because she fell and her hip's probably broken. You load her up on pain meds, not too much, but enough to make her comfortable. And I don't know, I'm going to be honest, those are my favorite ones because it's like, okay, I see the thing. I know how to help the thing. And I don't know if I just have the luck of the draw. I have the sweetest little elderly ladies that like at the end they're like, thank you. Me and my partner, she's also a female, but she's like, thank you, girls. I appreciate y'all. Or my other favorite is these big burly guys that you get called on for whatever, and you're loading them up. And they're like, can you girls lift me? I was like, oh my God. Tickets to the gun show. Safety's off. Let's go.
That's
But
awesome.
I think a big part of this field is like you're talking about the wins and the good moments and feeling like we're making a difference, but also just those little things you have to look forward to. And even like the calls that you may not want to go to, or you read the notes on what you're going to, and it's like, oh my God, like you've got to find some good somewhere. I mean, for yesterday's shift, me and my partner, we were going to a call, and based on the notes, we were dreading it. We were absolutely dreading it. And then it popped up what hospital they were requesting. And I looked at my partner, I'm like, you know what? Worst case, this hospital gives us free lunch. I'm like, so we're gonna load, we're gonna go. Little mama, if we ain't fixing to get that free lunch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that you guys do that. I'm in Canada, so we don't have hospitals here that really want us paramedic. Like, they don't try to encourage paramedics to bring their patients to them, because it's all it's not privatized that way. So when I'm in the States and I see that and I hear that, I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, you get to go there and they have like a fridge of food and they feed you, and right. So yeah, that's something I kind of wish we had up here, because then I think the main part of that is that you feel a sense of value, right? You have a sense that they value paramedics and they want you to come to their hospitals. What my take of it is. So it's, any sense of value and purpose that we can get when have a sense of being smashed all the time. That's I think that's a good thing.
I feel like it also cuts down on refusals that really should go to the hospital and like should not be left alone, because it's like,
Yeah, there's probably a negative side to that too. I get it, but I hope that call was good for you,
yeah, it was.
and I hope they fed you.
No, they did. Oh,
Oh,
bro, it was so 20 out of 10 recommend.
all right.
So back to things that are pretty important. What piece have you done that most speaks to you? Like, because you said you create these pieces like on calls that you've gone through, or ways to deal with the trauma and like the hard parts of this job, all that stuff. But like, do you have a specific work that like you put like, I don't want to say all of your heart into, but like it hurt, not necessarily hurt, but like it was more meaningful, or one that you connect with even more so than the rest? Like, what do you have one, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I do for sure. And it's I'm going to say the name of it, and you're going to be upset, because all paramedics and EMTs are. I called it the demon eats the ambulance driver, and I called it ambulance driver on purpose. And the reason I created it is I was suicidal. And my situation was a little bit different. So I didn't develop post-traumatic stress from one event. It was a gradual event. So I didn't even know. I felt that, I'm going to kill myself and then I'll be okay. That's how altered my brain chemistry was. And that's how altered my neural pathways became. And so I almost did. And by accident, when you earlier, you were saying you were complimenting me on seeking help, but I didn't actually, it was by mistake that I ended up hearing this psychologist talk about PTSD, and we were at work. And so we had to go with our crew, and a lot of the symptoms that he was explaining, I really connected with. And I never thought that I had it, even though at that same time I had a suicide plan, but I thought that was okay. And I went and got assessed, got evaluated, and sure enough, I had PTSD. Shocker, massive shocker. I didn't know, but that's when things really kind of started. And then that's when I started getting therapy. And okay, back to the story. So having that feeling or that emotion of, I have another piece called the cozy blanket, where I felt suicide was this cozy blanket that I could wrap myself around and protect myself from this constant onslaught of this negativity and these flashbacks and these feelings and these emotions. And I felt that was like a comforting thing that I could do. It was a way that I didn't have to feel anything anymore. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to leave my family, but I thought that was keeping in mind that my brain chemistry was severely altered. My neural pathways were severely altered. So having that sense when I was like that was the motivation to create that picture. The reason I called it The Demon Eats the Ambulance Driver is because in the image, there's this giant, it's very graphic and it's really disturbing to look at, is this giant monster is eating the head off of this paramedic. So he has this paramedic like gripped in his hands and he's like chewing off the head of this paramedic. And his arms are down. So this paramedic isn't even defending himself. So he's no longer a paramedic. He's an ambulance driver because he doesn't really connect. And the idea is that he is literally being consumed by his trauma. And the idea is that he is succumbing to his mental injury by deciding to take his life. And that is the act of suicide. That is my favorite. So when I think of a image that pops into my head that portrays this complex idea, so in that case, I'm like, okay, well, how can I portray these thoughts that I was having, very complex and hard to describe? How can I portray that in an image? And that image popped into my head. And when I have the image that's popped into my head, the closer that the end product is to the image that I had in my head, that is a successful image for me. And that is the most successful image. So when I look at that picture, I'm like, yep, that's exactly how I felt. Literally being consumed and handled by this big monster of trauma how I describe it. And it's literally devouring me. And I'm not defending myself. I'm like, yep, have me take it. I just don't want to feel anything anymore. So that is my most favorite image. And people when I do my presentation, I talk about it and I show it. And people that are aware of it, like at EMS World, I don't display it when I exhibit my artwork, but I always bring a few copies with me because people always come up and ask me about it because I know that they've connected to it in a similar way. So like, hey, and they call it, it's kind of been nicknamed Dead, like Demon Eats the Ambulance Driver. So they're like, hey, Dan, do you have that dead image? And I know exactly what they're talking about. And I always have a copy underneath and I know exactly why they asked me about it. So I bring it out and I give it to them and sign it. And it's great. Like it's really helped me out a lot. Like that sounds messed up, right? It sounds messed up. But when I do that and I'm able to portray it, then I'm able to capture it. Then I'm able to change it from this complex being that, lives in my head that I really don't have any control over to controlling it in this two-dimensional image. So that Demon It's the Ambulance Driver, I love that one. And every once in a while I'll share it and all the comments, we don't like being called ambulance drivers. You don't understand. That's very, I'm like, I know it is. I get it. I know. That's why I called it that way. But every few years I post it and I always get those comments. Dan, I thought you knew us better than that. Shouldn't call us ambulance drivers. I know, I get it. But that's why I called it that. So yeah, that is my favorite one.
No, I respect that. I think I'm pretty sure I've seen it, but I think it was a little bit terrifying. So I'm just like, oh, okay, next.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty messed up to look at. But it's and when I create the artwork, I don't try to make it gratuitous. I don't try to make them shocking. What I'm trying to do is recreate the image I have in my head as accurately as I can. So I'm not thinking, I don't censor them that way. So if I censor them in meaning that, what are people going to like? Or people not going to like this? What are people going to buy? If I start doing that, then it loses the cathartic and beneficial process of a healing process for me. So I can't censor it that way. So when that one came out and it was done, I looked at it, I'm like, oh man, this is messed up. But it was so perfectly accurate to how I was feeling.
Hands down. And then to kind of wrap things up. So you've talked about your journey and your pieces, what you want people to get from it, how it can and it has impacted the EMS community as a whole and the first responder and healthcare professional field. Have your motivations to like create your works changed? Or do you have like different techniques or different like things you want to push, or like, do you plan on taking your work somewhere else? Like, where are you at now, and where are you going with this?
Yeah, so I still have, like, after 20 years, I still have a lot of things I need to process. So I continue to create artwork that way. But I also do lots of different type of artwork. I do a lot of empowering artwork. So I travel and I meet many of our peers and I create lots of portrait work for them. I do a lot of scenario based work for other crews based on their experiences. So I do a lot of that kind of thing. And I'm actually back in school. So I'm back in school learning, working toward a master's in psychology. And I'm about halfway through the first portion of being a registered counseling therapist. So that'll be done. I'll be done that part in about a year. And then I'll go back to school for another 2 years for a master's. And so that's really where my focus is right now, is to really help people, because I'm not in the ambulance anymore, but I want to continue helping, this time, our peers, and to really concentrate on post-traumatic stress, of course, but I want to help our peers in interpersonal relationships, secondary to trauma, substance abuse and addiction, secondary to trauma, um, grief, which is something we don't really talk about, but it's something that we suffer from. And that's kind of where my focus is now. And I think my artwork is going to start reflecting, because as an artist, that's what my artwork does. It's a way for me to express the experiences I'm having in my life. And so as my experiences change, my artwork is going to change. When I look at artwork, when I go to an art gallery, the images are great, but I'm always more interested in the motivation of the artist and why they created it and what was going on in their life at that time. I find that way more interesting. And then my techniques, my techniques are always changing through technology. Things are always changing. So I'm always trying new things. And I look way back into my first images that I created. Um, I probably wouldn't create them the same way today.
Because we all grow and adapt. I went back recently, and like, I haven't done a podcast for very long, but I was kind of like rummaging through a couple of things, and I went back to my very first episode I put out, and I cringed so hard. And I even asked myself, I'm like, why do people listen to this? Woo. um, but yeah, my guy, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate your journey, your motive behind creating your works, especially, I mean, being vulnerable today, but also just, it's a hard place to get out of from where you were. It's not even just like a struggle to get out, but it's a struggle to regain a sense of normalcy and find peace again. Because sometimes,
Hmm.
like the blanket, you get so wrapped up in it, and it's so comfortable, and it's uncomfortable having to change and grow. So thankful to have you here today, on the podcast, and quite literally. But dude, I'm a fan. I love what you do. I love what you're putting out. I'm always excited in case there's a new one coming out. So,
Hmm.
but if you want to tell the people where to find you, where you're at, all that kind of stuff, what you got?
Yeah. So my main webpage is dansunphotos.com. And Dan Sun is the first three letters of my first and last name. So DANSUN, and then photos.com. So you go there and you can find, that's where all my main links and stuff are. Or even if you just Google DANSUN, Dan Sun, I'll pop up all over there and you'll be able to find me that way as well.
Perfect. You got anything else to add, my guy?
No, well, yes, I guess so. It's, I think it's important for people. You mentioned earlier that, sometimes it's really hard to, you find that you're in a space that it's difficult to recover, or you just want peace, or you want, you just feel this constant struggle all the time. But it's important to know that others, of your peers, myself included, and many of the other people that I know, do get better. The big trick is to find what helps you get better, and to know that just recovering back to where you were, yes, that's what our goal is. But by doing the work of recovery, pruning over those old traumatic pathways in your brain, creating new, healthier pathways in your brain, and kind of really doing the work of recovery, you can actually become different than you were before your trauma. And that's what post-traumatic growth is about. And it's not a weird thing. It's not like only a few people can do it. I see it all the time in our peers, so much that I have a conference. I have a post-traumatic growth conference every year. My next one is this weekend. So when I travel, I meet people that have gone through incredibly traumatic experiences as an emergency worker. And because of those experiences, it altered their life in a good way. And I want to share that with people because that's a massive sense of hope, right? Where when you're in it, you really can't see a way out of it because your capacity has changed. The trauma has changed your capacity to do that. And sometimes we need help, maybe from our peers or someone to help you work through that stuff, process it all, put it all away, build some resilience. So when it smashes you again, you kind of recognize it and you have your coping mechanisms defined and actually become better because of the trauma. So it happens all the time. It's not a weird thing. I just want people to know that.
100%. Yeah, I can't even add anything to that. So, Dan, I appreciate having you on. Appreciate what you do. And if that's all you got, that's all I got. And as I end every single episode, so with that.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Your Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.